Today, we are embarking on a profound exploration: how Islam, originating in the harsh and volatile Arabian Peninsula, rapidly transformed into a global faith and civilization, reshaping the world map forever. If you want to understand the political, social, and spiritual forces behind this extraordinary transformation, you must stay with us until the very end. Please like and subscribe to support our historical deep dives. The 7th century CE saw the birth of Islam in a region largely isolated from the dominant powers of the era, the Byzantine, Eastern Roman Empire, and the Sasanian Persian Empire. The Arabian Peninsula was a patchwork of independent tribes, dominated by a nomadic lifestyle, Bedouin, and marked by fierce tribal loyalty, or Asabiya. This was the Jahiliyyah, or the Age of Ignorance, characterized by polytheism, animism, and ancestor worship, with local deities often housed at the Kaaba in Mecca. However, this was not a purely primitive society. Key Arabian cities like Mecca and Yathrib, later Medina, were vital hubs on the international trade routes connecting the Indian Ocean and East Africa to the Mediterranean world. Mecca, in particular, was an economic powerhouse, built on commerce and the pilgrimage traffic generated by the Kaaba. This commercial environment brought the Arabs into contact with monotheistic ideas, as significant Jewish and Christian communities thrived in regions like Yemen and Syria, influencing the local spiritual landscape. The social structure, however, was highly inequitable, with wealth concentrated in the hands of a few Quraysh merchant families in Mecca, leading to neglect of the poor, orphans, and women. This tension between entrenched tribal customs and growing economic inequality set the stage for radical social change. Muhammad ibn Abdullah was born in Mecca around 570 CE into the respected, but not wealthy, Banu Hashim clan of the Quraysh tribe. Following a career as a successful and trusted merchant, he became known as Al-Amin, the trustworthy one. The societal injustices he witnessed in Mecca, the exploitation, the lack of mercy, and the intense greed, led him to seek solitary meditation. At the age of 40, around 610 CE, while meditating in a cave on Mount Hira, he received the first revelation from God, Allah, through the angel Gabriel. This event marked the beginning of the Quran, the central religious text of Islam. The initial message was simple but revolutionary: the affirmation of one God, monotheism, or Tawhid, the denunciation of Meccan polytheism and idolatry, and a fierce emphasis on social justice, charity, zakat, and accountability on the Day of Judgment. The early message was met with hostility by the Meccan elite. The leaders of the Quraysh saw Islam's attack on polytheism as a direct threat to the Kaaba's status as a pilgrimage site, which was the foundation of their economic and political power. The monotheistic message, which declared all believers equal before God, also undermined the tribal hierarchies upon which Meccan society was built. Consequently, the first converts to Islam were often marginalized individuals: the poor, slaves, like Bilal, women, like Khadija, the Prophet's first wife, and younger men who lacked influence in the old structure. As persecution against the growing Muslim community intensified, the social pressure became untenable. After a period of severe hardship and the deaths of key protectors, the Prophet Muhammad, SAV, and his followers sought a new sanctuary. This sanctuary was found in the city of Yathrib, a large oasis town about 320 kilometers north of Mecca, which suffered from chronic civil strife among its various Arab and Jewish tribes. This sanctuary was found in the city of Yathrib, a large oasis town about 320 kilometers north of Mecca, which suffered from chronic civil strife among its various Arab and Jewish tribes. Following extensive negotiations, the Prophet Muhammad and his followers executed the Hijra, in 622 CE. This migration, a pivotal turning point in world history, marks the start of the Islamic calendar and the spiritual, political, and social transformation of the nascent faith. Upon arrival, Yathrib was renamed Medinat an-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, or simply Medina. The Prophet immediately set about establishing the Ummah, or the unified Muslim community. This was codified in the Constitution of Medina, a remarkable political document that established a framework for governance, defined the rights and duties of the Muslim, Jewish, and pagan communities within the city, and created an overarching loyalty to the Ummah that superseded old tribal ties. This was a radical break from the tribalism of Jahiliyyah, a shift from ethnic kinship to religious political allegiance. The establishment of the Ummah and the creation of a distinct Islamic identity led quickly to conflict. The Meccan Quraysh viewed the Ummah as an existential economic and political threat as the Muslims began to disrupt the crucial Meccan trade routes passing near Medina. This economic hostility escalated into military confrontation. Pivotal battles, such as the Battle of Badr, 624 C, the Battle of Uhud, 625 C, and the Battle of the Trench, 627 C, demonstrated the spiritual tenacity and military resilience of the fledgling Muslim state against the numerically superior Meccan forces. The political and military success of Medina gradually eroded the Meccan elite's power. In 628 CE, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah paved the way for peaceful interaction, and by 630 CE, Muhammad entered Mecca virtually unopposed. Idol worship was purged from the Kaaba, which was rededicated as the central shrine of monotheistic worship, marking the definitive religious triumph in Arabia. By the time of the Prophet Muhammad's death in 632 CE, Islam had united much of the Arabian Peninsula under a single spiritual and political banner. However, his passing sparked a crisis of succession. The community quickly elected Abu Bakr, a close companion and the Prophet's father-in-law, as the first caliph or successor. This period began the era of the Rashidun Caliphate, the rightly guided caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. The first challenge faced by the caliphate was the Ridda Wars of apostasy, initiated by tribes who believed their loyalty was personal to the Prophet and thus dissolved upon his death. Abu Bakr's resolute military campaigns quickly reunified the peninsula. With Arabia stabilized, the focus shifted outward. The phenomenal speed of the subsequent Islamic expansion is one of history's great marvels. Motivated by religious conviction, the unification of purpose, and the weakness of their gigantic neighbors, the Caliphate armies began campaigns against the two superpower empires. The Byzantines and Sasanians had exhausted themselves over decades of intermittent warfare, leaving their peripheral regions vulnerable and their subjects open to a new, less oppressive regime. Within a single generation, the Muslim armies achieved stunning victories in key regions like Syria and Persia. The phenomenal speed of the subsequent Islamic expansion is one of history's great marvels. Motivated by religious conviction, the unification of purpose, and the weakness of their gigantic neighbors, the Caliphate armies began campaigns against the two superpower empires. The Byzantines and Sasanians had exhausted themselves over decades of intermittent warfare, leaving their peripheral regions vulnerable and their subjects, often disgruntled Coptic Christians, Nestorian Christians, or Jews, open to a new, less oppressive regime. Within a single generation, the Muslim armies achieved stunning victories. Key Byzantine territories, including Syria, Battle of Yarmouk, 636 CE, and Egypt, conquered by 642 CE, fell swiftly. Even more dramatically, the ancient Sasanian Persian Empire was completely dismantled by 651 CE, extending the Caliphate's borders deep into Central Asia. The motivations for these rapid conquests were complex. They were fueled by religious zeal, economic necessity, securing resources and trade routes, and the internal dynamics of the newly unified Arab tribes who sought outlets for their energy and conflict resolution outside of Arabia. Crucially, the conquered populations were often integrated through tolerance rather than forced conversion. The jizya, or poll tax on non-Muslims, people of the book, provided a stable revenue stream, and religious minorities were permitted to practice their faiths under the dhimmi status, enjoying protection and autonomy in exchange for submission. This pragmatic tolerance often made Muslim rule preferable to the heavy taxation and doctrinal rigidity imposed by the Byzantine and Sasanian rulers. The expansive nature of the caliphate led to internal strife, culminating in the First Civil War, First Fitna, and the shift in power. Following the assassination of the third Caliph Uthman and the subsequent conflict between Ali, the fourth Caliph, and Muawiyah, governor of Syria, the Ummah was tragically divided. Muawiyah emerged victorious, establishing the Umayyad Caliphate in 661 CE and moving the capital from Medina to Damascus. This transition marked a crucial institutional shift. The caliphate moved from a community-based elective process to a hereditary, dynastic empire, focusing more on imperial administration than purely religious piety. The Umayyads centralized the vast empire, established a professional army, and implemented Arabic as the language of administration. The Umayyad period, 661 to 750 CE, saw the caliphate reach its greatest geographical extent. The armies pushed west across North Africa, completing the conquest of the entire Maghreb region. In 711 CE, a combined Berber and Arab force crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and rapidly conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula, establishing a flourishing Islamic presence that would last for nearly 8 centuries. Al-Andalus. The empire now stretched from the borders of China and India in the east to the Atlantic Ocean in the west. This enormous realm facilitated unprecedented cross-cultural exchange. Arabic became the lingua franca of trade and scholarship across 3 continents, drawing on the traditions of Greece, Persia, India, and Byzantium. This integration of diverse cultures set the stage for the intellectual revolution that was soon to follow. However, the Umayyads faced increasing opposition, particularly from non-Arab Muslims, Mali, who felt discriminated against, and from those who favored a return to the religious piety of the early caliphate. This resentment, combined with dissatisfaction in the eastern provinces, fueled the Abbasid revolution. Led by descendants of the Prophet's uncle, Al-Abbas, the revolutionary forces successfully overthrew the Umayyad dynasty in 750 CE. This pivotal event redirected the course of the Islamic world, shifting its political and cultural center eastward, away from the Byzantine influences of Damascus and toward the Sasanian Persian heartland. This shift was instrumental in the intellectual and scientific explosion that defined the subsequent era. The successful overthrow of the Umayyad dynasty in 750 CE by the revolutionary Abbasids was a pivotal moment. The new dynasty shifted the capital eastward, establishing the magnificent city of Baghdad in 762 CE. This move symbolized a profound cultural transformation, bringing Persian bureaucratic traditions and intellectual influence to the forefront of the Islamic world. The Abbasid era, 750 to 1258 CE, is often referred to as the Islamic Golden Age, a period defined not primarily by military conquest, but by unprecedented intellectual, scientific, and cultural flourishing. The Abbasids invested heavily in scholarship and knowledge acquisition. The most famous institution of this period was the Beit al-Hikmah, House of Wisdom, in Baghdad, a vast library, translation center, and research academy. Scholars, regardless of their religious background, flocked to Baghdad to translate and study the great works of Greek, Persian, and Indian civilization. This sustained effort of translation and commentary preserved and advanced classical learning, a knowledge base that was largely lost in Western Europe at the time. This intellectual synthesis led to profound advances in various fields. In mathematics, the incorporation of Indian numerals, including 0, led to the development of algebra. In astronomy, the creation of sophisticated observatories. And in medicine, comprehensive medical encyclopedias were compiled by figures like Ibn Sina, Avicenna, establishing pharmacology and clinical observation. The vast Abbasid realm was sustained by a thriving global economy. The unified Islamic territory provided secure trade routes, connecting the Mediterranean to China, the Silk Road, and East Africa, which facilitated not only the exchange of goods, but also the spread of ideas, technologies, and faith itself. Islamic merchants, known for their honesty and reliable currency, were integral to this global network. This economic prosperity allowed the urban centers to grow and fund the great scientific and architectural projects that became the hallmarks of the Golden Age. The faith, having spread through conquest in the earlier centuries, now spread increasingly through trade and scholarship. The universal tenets of Islam, which offered equality before God and clear legal structures, Sharia, continued to appeal to diverse populations seeking spiritual and social stability. By the 10th century, the Islamic world represented the largest and most advanced civilization on Earth, a true global faith underpinned by a magnificent intercontinental empire. The rise of Islam was a convergence of faith, law, and intellectual curiosity that took a small community from the fringes of civilization and, in less than 2 centuries, successfully birthed a sophisticated, global civilization. This legacy of intellectual achievement and spiritual unity continues to define the regions it touched. Our comprehensive review has demonstrated that the rise of Islam was a historical marvel, a strategic and spiritual synthesis that provided structure and meaning across 3 continents. If this detailed analysis has deepened your understanding of this pivotal era, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more historical journeys that peel back the layers of our past. Thank you for staying with us.